I used to keep people alive in the wilderness for a living. The most dangerous thing I've ever done is date a man. Like, I wish I was kidding. I literally was a guide. That's me right there. Whitewater guy, raft guy in New Mexico, Wyoming, Washington State. Yes, I did this for fun on my days off. This is in Utah. I was a wilderness guide, like a backpacking guide, kept groups of teenagers alive on 23-day camping, canoeing, and climbing trips. 23 days straight in the woods. I've seen so many bears, y'all, you wouldn't believe. I climbed here, Patagonia, like my tent's over here somewhere. Traveled down there by myself. Didn't know anybody. Like, this is Patagonia. Lived in the gunks for a while, climbed trad, sport climbing. I've been climbing for over 20 years. All over. Like, this right here is me on a Tinder date in the French Alps. Okay? Like, this is just a normal day for me. Just hanging out. This is what I did. This has never been as scary as dating men. Lived in my truck for over 5 years. Yeah, it's like, it's slightly larger than a coffin. And more comfortable, I'm sure. I lived in this in Argentina when I worked on a strawberry farm with a bunch of strangers. Didn't know anybody there. I actually hitchhiked here because I'm kind of dumb. When I worked in the outdoors, which was many, many years, I rarely slept in tents. I either slept in my truck, or if there were no humans around, I did this because I preferred that. I lived in this trailer, no running water, crapped in a bucket over here. No electricity, really. Like, sometimes I could plug it into the restaurant that I worked at that was nearby and run like a little radiator, but it was cold. Lived in another trailer. This was my toilet. Had to carry that myself. Rode this all over Spain. Never rode one before. Figured it out. Like, this was my life. Facing my fears. Putting myself in danger. Perhaps a bit reckless at times. But I was so confident in myself, in my survival skills, in my ability to rely on my intuition and my resourcefulness and all those things, right? Like, and I love challenging myself. I love looking my fear in the face or whatever and just being like, I'm just going to push through this. And that made me more confident and more, self-reliant, which I'm now realizing is like individualism, okay? I'm not into individualism anymore, but you get the point, right? Especially as a woman, being able to trust yourself and know that you can take care of yourself in a society that has told you that, you need a protector and a provider when all those men do is actually harm you and scare the crap out of you and exploit you. And that actually we're the ones who are caring for people usually, right? Like, but I'm like, I don't know, like I don't want a man because they seem to not be that like reliable. So I just learned to take care of myself, right? Somehow I did not die during these first 15 years of crazy adventures all over the place. Sleeping on strangers' couches, on couchsurfing.com for months on end. I have crazy stories. And I used to be introduced in New York when I would get on stage and do storytelling as, we can't believe she's still alive, Melanie Hamlet, right? Like, my poor mom. That's probably one reason why I don't have kids. I would never want to put myself through what I probably put my mom through, right? It's scary to have a child who does all this stuff. Protesting in Chile when they were trying to, about their student loan stuff, because they're facing the same things that people in the U.S. are, and with these crazy, anyway, whatever, that's another video. New sport, I'll try it. I love trying things. I love challenging myself. In fact, I was on a National Geographic show about survivors and the survivor brain and people who just how they respond in life-threatening situations. I was one of 4 people who was the talent on that, right? They literally heard about me and were like, come be on this show, okay? This is one of the things I had to do. They dropped me off of a cliff in this thingy, and I was like, ah! I had to get across the river in a barrel, whatever. It was kind of dumb in the end, whatever. But fun experience, cool people, mostly. I worked in the film industry in New York for many years, so it was nice to be around crew, but I'm just used to not being the talent or whatever. I'm used to being art department or whatever. Speaking of which, I moved to New York City with no money and lived in a cubicle made of sheets. This right here, literally. I had a mattress on the floor and my legs were underneath this staircase that led to this attic right here, or the roof. I worked for the back of Outward Bound. There were 5 of us in this room. We walked around with a headlamp, 1 bathroom, a tiny kitchen. A guy slept on the roof. Like, this is how I moved to New York City, right? Because I didn't have any money, but I got a job as a backpacking guide. We led them on backpacking trips in the city and then outside of the city. Anyway, I had the coolest life in New York, learning to do improv and storytelling and working on the film industry. And I snuck into this set just to take this photo because I couldn't help myself. No idea what I was doing. Went from living in my truck to living in New York City. And then at a certain point I moved into LA. And then I lived in South America for a little while. And then I moved to Spain without knowing anybody. I lived in Sweden without knowing anybody for a while. I moved to France not knowing anybody at all or the language. I am dumb, okay? Or brave, however you want to call it. But either way, I have always prided myself on challenging myself and facing my fears. And the one thing I was always afraid of was men, dating men, being around men other than his like tough sister. Because all they did was screw me over, exploit me, blah, blah, blah. So I just didn't mess with them. And at the age of 36, I decided, you know what? I'm going to give this a try. I'm going to try to date, like really date. And that man almost killed me. Tried to. Raped me. All kinds of stuff. All the things, right? And left me with more trauma that I'm still trying to undo. Like almost 10 years later? That one man. After all that, y'all, I didn't even talk about everything. That's just like a little synopsis of my life. The most dangerous thing I ever did was date the wrong man. One man. The first man I really let into my heart. Boom! Almost died. And the reason I want to talk about this is because people seem to think that you'll never fall into this. This will never happen to you. And maybe it won't. Maybe it won't, right? And I had a lot of trauma. I had a lot of nervous system stuff from trauma from childhood. Blah, blah, blah. I had a lot of stuff that kind of set me up to go in that direction. And yet, I was not an easy target in general. I was stronger, I thought, than that man I dated. He couldn't even rock climb. I was tougher than him. I was smarter than him. I was more financially stable than him. This dude was a loser. A total loser. Literal hobosexual. Didn't have resources. Didn't have a driver's license. Didn't have a social security card. Didn't have any, maybe he did. He was just lying about all of that because he's probably wanted by the police. Man was dumb as rocks. Dumb as rocks. But predatory, senses. Brilliant in that regard. Was always one step ahead of me. I swear to God, I always thought I was 10 steps ahead of him, and he was at least 1 to 2 to 3 to 5 steps ahead of me. He always knew. They're brilliant. So the reason why I'm saying this is, I did a video earlier today about FKA Twigs and awful stuff she's going through right now. And one of the things I covered in that was her beautiful story in the New York Times. And the reason why she told that story, among other reasons, was that she wanted women to stop thinking that it'll never happen to you and to stop asking women, why did you stay? All that stuff. To educate women and to also help people have more empathy for victims of domestic violence. And also, sometimes the most unlikely people, and it's not just women this happens to, right? It happens across gender, but sometimes the most unlikely victims are the most screwed because no one thinks they would ever end up in that situation. Okay, maybe not the most screwed, but the most trapped in our heads because it is so embarrassing to be a feminist. Like, that was my job, was talking about feminism. Look at me, I'm a feminist. And then being like a rock climber. I literally am tougher than any man I have ever worked with in my life. Tougher. They would tell me that. How does someone like me end up in that situation? That's exactly how someone like me ends up in that situation. No one would have expected it. No one would have predicted it. No one would even believe it if it didn't come out of my own mouth. And even when it did, people are like, huh? You? The perfect victim doesn't exist. It can be literally anyone. And sometimes the strongest, most unlikely people in your life are the most vulnerable.